comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
I am back, and you are comfortably zoned in Alameda, California, with me, Ralph Tyko, the Zigzag Man, and we are right across the bay from San Francisco in the northern part of the state, and we're at the 420 studio down by the Lagoon, as Archie Bunker would say. If anybody's out there has ever been to Alameda, there is a man-made lagoon that runs through it, and it's kind of pungent. So you'll recognize Alameda right away by the lagoon. And we're across the way. I'm blessed. I do this thing on a weekly basis, and I get to talk to some of the most interesting people in the world. And as most of you know who follow me, I'm somewhat of a baseball fan, to put it understated, let's put it that way. And I get to enjoy meeting folks that either played the game, wrote about the game, coached the game, managed the game, trained people in the game, or wrote books about the game. Now, today I've got someone who's an author, is writing a book about baseball, and is also a former broadcaster, but a very special one. You are Don Warlow, sight challenged, if you will. Am I correct?
Well, now, Ralph, blind is the word I prefer, and that's because I'll tell you why. There's a reason. I have no eyes whatsoever. People who are visually challenged have some sight to their name, where I have no eyes and no vision whatsoever. So from the day one, I was a blind kid, and I grew up to be a blind man and a blind broadcaster.
Okay. I don't have to ask how that came about, obviously at birth, and you took it as you didn't skip a beat growing up. Got to give a lot of credit to your parents, because you obviously had a dream to be a broadcaster, and you weren't going to let anything stop that. And
right, and my family, from the very beginning, I have 3 sisters and I have 1 brother, and my parents were determined that I was going to be as normal a kid as I could possibly be, and they wanted that. All my brother and 3 sisters are all older than me. My parents wanted them to make sure that I became as normal as I could be, so I set the table, and I did the dishes, and I even weeded my mom's yard, although I think sometimes she regretted that I weeded the yard.
Right. There might have been a few roses that probably got lost in there, I'm guessing.
Especially one day in particular, I wanted to go to a Yankee game, and the thing was that she told me the week before that I was supposed to weed the yard, and I hadn't done it. Heaven knows why now after all these years. But this one Sunday morning, she's like, "Oh, wait a minute, where do you think you're going?" I'm like, "Yankee Stadium." And she said, "You're not going to Yankee Stadium. You didn't weed the yard last week, so you're going to weed it right now." So I went out there to weed the yard, had my radio. Yankees were losing, so at first that was okay. 6-1, who wants to be at that game? Well,
right.
Darned if they didn't make a little comeback, make it 6-2. 6-4, well, it's still okay, but I'm weeding the yard. 3-run home run, they won it walk-off style, 7-6, and there definitely went some of my mom's flowers.
Oh. And kids, she couldn't blame you. How do you, what?
Exactly.
What flowers? Do you remember the first game you ever went to?
Oh, do I ever. My dad, he knew I was already a baseball fan from the radio. I started listening when I was 8 years old. And, of course, like any kid that's 8 years old, I'm like, Daddy, when can you take me to a game? And he's like, well, when you're big enough, son, when you're big enough. So, well, what I didn't know, and I learned later on, is two things. One, he was ill. He was chronically ill. And he didn't always have a lot of money to throw around on things like taking me to the game. Well, come the day, the 6th August, 1972, I was 9 years old, and his health allowed him to take me, and he had the money, for the game tickets. Mm-hmm. And we got to Shea Stadium. I was a Mets fan at that time. And he said, son, you got to wait a minute here. We just have to stand here and wait. We can't go in just yet. And we didn't know why. I couldn't see what was going down. But we stood there, and all of a sudden, here's Lindsey Nelson, one of the Mets broadcasters. And he comes up to me, and he shakes my hand. And I don't know what I said to him. It couldn't have made much sense. And he walked off, and then here comes Ralph Kiner, one of the Mets' other broadcasters. And I get the same glad hand, and we say a few words, hey, Donnie, good you're at the game, and that kind of thing. And he goes off, and last but not least is my favorite one of any of them, Bob Murphy.
Yeah.
And I met him twice, as a matter of fact, once that day and once later on, and neither time could I make sentences, not either time, because that's the guy. That's the man who, at long distance, taught me about baseball.
Wow.
My dad and Grandpa taught me at short range, and what he did...
What was the second meeting, the circumstances of the second meeting?
I met Murphy in 1994 when the Marlins had arranged for my broadcast partner and myself to do a few innings at a Marlins-Cubs game, but they wanted us to do a presser before that at a Shea Stadium game, Marlins against Mets. And I met Bob Murphy on that occasion, and at that time I was 31 years old, and still I was very starstruck meeting him. And Bob Murphy then was very, very deaf, and because of that, to get close enough to hear me, he almost had to have his arm around me. And can you imagine, somebody who is that special in your life having his arm around you, and you talking to him? It was beyond words.
Oh, how very nice.
What I didn't know in 1972, what I found out
all
later.
of our friends, our favorite teams broadcasters, we grow up, they all like friends. I feel that way to this day about having listened to the broadcasters, not just baseball, but Marty Glickman, having grown up in New York.
He was the best. Oh, Marty Glickman was the best for football. And you got Bill King out there years ago. You probably heard him.
Oh, many times.
Bill King was awesome. Yeah.
Whoever you are, whatever team
this was the beautiful part.
There's a special
beautiful part about. Sorry.
No,
the beautiful part about when I went to the game in '72, what I didn't know is Dad had written a letter to the Mets media guy, Jay Horowitz, and he had said, I have a blind son, and my son would like to meet the broadcasters, and nobody would dare tell me ahead of time for fear that it would fall apart. I mean, who knew whether they could actually do it, as busy as these broadcasters were. But today that would be called a meet and greet. We did that, and Dad was the tallest dad for miles around.
Oh, wow. Very nice. What did he do, your dad, in life that enabled him to inspire you the way he did and enabled him to not put limitations on you? What contributed to that?
Well, Dad was a factory worker at Johnson & Johnson in New Jersey. He was a machine operator. And what he drilled into me more than anything else was the ethic of work. If you're going to work, you're going to work as hard as you can, give it everything that you have. You know, if you go to work and you do a lazy man's job, then you're not going to keep that job very long. You know, Dad taught me that above all things.
And when you went to school, what, I'm sure you weren't thinking of being a broadcaster until something came up. Was that after school or something that you used school to prepare the career for?
Well, I, for the longest time, wanted to be a disc jockey as opposed to a baseball broadcaster. I loved the game, but I'm listening to the very best of the very best in New York, and I'm never thinking for a minute that I could do what they did. So I wanted to play records.
Well, it was Murray the K in the swinging soiree with the blast.
Well, I didn't know by the time I got to college that the disc jockey's era was closing fast and the music was all going to come by satellite. I didn't know that. But I'll tell you how I got inspired to do baseball. In high school, away from high school on Saturdays, I was just playing my radio, twiddling the dial, and it's March, and all of a sudden I'm hearing baseball, and it's not spring training yet, and I didn't know at first, but it was a college game between Columbia University and Iona. And with a little more dial twisting, I heard Seton Hall Radio, and I heard Fordham, and they all broadcast baseball at that time. This is in the late 70s. And hearing them, these announcers are only a couple of years older than I am, and I'm hearing them, they're making mistakes. You know, they sound like actual human beings instead of like the best of the best, like Bob Murphy and Vince Scully. I mean, they never drop a clanger. But these guys just sounded normal, and I'm thinking I could do what they're doing. I could be that good or maybe a little better if I work hard enough. And I knew I was going to college because all the rest of my family had gone to college. So I reckoned when I got into college, I would get in with the radio station and try to find somebody who'd do my play-by-play while I did color commentary. I knew, obviously, I couldn't do play-by-play. I knew what my niche would be if I could find a play-by-play man.
Right. Now, how did that come about?
That was a struggle. There was a list of 17 people at the radio station at Glassboro State, where I went to college, which is now called Rowan University. They've changed the name. But at the time, there was a list of 17 names, and they all claimed to want to be sports broadcasters. And one by one, I would buttonhole each one of them. And I'd say, you know, I want to be a broadcaster. I want somebody to do play-by-play while I do color, for baseball in particular. And one by one, they all said no. You know, Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign was big right then, and they were all just saying no, one by one.
That didn't work for a lot of reasons, so it wasn't going to work in baseball either.
Exactly. But I got to the last name on the list, and his name was Jim Lucas. And he was hard to locate. I tried to leave messages, and he had a DJ show, and I tried to call him during the DJ show, and that never worked. So one night, I went in there to do a scoreboard show, a 5-minute roundup of the latest scores or schedule or whatever was going to happen. And this was a November night in 1983. And I did my scoreboard show, and I came out of the studio, and I heard 4 words that changed my life. I heard Jim Lucas say, "Hey, Don, nice job." And I knew the voice of Jim Lucas for several reasons, because I'd heard the DJ show, and the year before, when I was not ready to broadcast yet, I had tape recorded a couple of games off the radio station, and his was one of them. And I'd listened to that game repeatedly because I didn't have much else to listen to. So I knew his voice as well as I knew anybody's voice on the whole college campus. So I said, "You're Jim Lucas." And well, he stepped back a little bit because he wasn't used to being recognized in spite of his DJ show. And I said to him, I said, "Jim, are you up for a challenge?" I've been looking for somebody to do play-by-play while I do color. And he thought about it a few seconds, and he said, yeah, I'll do that. And I said, let's get back to my dorm and let's plan our strategy, because the big guys at the station, they might not like this idea of a blind guy broadcasting. So we went back to my dorm. We went into the dorm. He says, I lived here when I was a freshman. And we turned down the hallway, and he said, this is the hallway where I lived. We went to my room, and there were some initials carved in the wall. And he says, I lived in this room when I was a freshman. So that showed me two things. One, that there was something special going on. And two, I knew where all the empty beer cans and pizza boxes had come from.
Okay. So you guys had that in common.
You know it. We started with basketball, and we did some of that. And come March of '84, we did baseball through that baseball season. And once Jim had said yes, once he did, and it became clear that I could broadcast, suddenly others who at first didn't want to work with me were interested when Jim left school, and I was looking for other announcing partners. I had them after he had broken the ice and proven that it could be done with a blind guy.
Wow. What were you and Jim's first gig doing baseball?
Well, professionally, we broke in with the Miracle. They were called the Miami Miracle in the Florida State League, and they played in Pompano Beach, as a matter of fact. We were there in 1991 and 1992. And
well, you know, I used to go to, my mother lived in Florida the final years of her life, and I'd go back and go to Point St. Lucie. That was hard for me to say. I ought to be in radio.
St. Lucie, yeah.
And we may have met at that time, because I distinctly remember you.
About that.
You might have been on the road with Miami at that time. So,
yeah, and there's quite a story to how we got that gig in the first place. We had spent the time in between college and turning pro. We spent it going to Yankee Stadium, going to Shea, sitting in the upper stands, going to Vet Stadium in Philly. That was the easiest one. We'd sit upstairs and we'd have a tape recorder, and we would do our own version of the broadcast, just like we were doing it for real. And in 1990, Jim said, we've come as far as we can go practicing. We're never going to get any better unless we actually get a professional gig. Then we'll learn better how to do this. So he came up with an idea to write a letter and send a tape of some of what we called our best work to every team that existed at that time. There were 176. There was no independent ball then. There was no Northern League, no Frontier League. There's several Atlantic League, but they didn't exist in 1990. Everything was organized ball, and we sent 176 letters, and I signed them all. My hand never hurt so much in my life. But we got back maybe 30 form letters saying no. We got 13 relatively nice handwritten rejections where they had obviously listened to our work and liked it, but they didn't want us, doing the gig there. And we got one positive, and that positive was from Mike Veck. And we had speculated when we saw, yes, we didn't know for sure, but we found out, yes. But we speculated during our night with the 176 letters, could this Veck be any relative to Bill Veck? And if so, maybe we'd have a shot. And what he invited us to do was to come for one night in July of 1990 and do 8 innings from the second inning on we could do on the radio. So we'd have honest radio experience under our belt. But we went down a couple
radio
days.
Experience too. They're paying you money to do it, and
so we
that
went down a couple of days early. Yeah.
that in itself, Don, from someone who has all of my senses, so to speak, and for one reason or another didn't pursue what you were pursuing when I was young, and I've regretted that all my life, and I fortunately do this to finish it all out. But I am so thrilled that you did what you did, and you pursued your dream, and your dream came true. That's wonderful. I've got goosebumps, man. I'll tell you.
And we were 2 years with the Miracle. The second year, because the Marlins were coming in, they wanted the teams to move out of that part of Florida. So the Miracle moved out of Pompano, and we went to Fort Myers, to a absolutely beautiful stadium in Fort Myers. And we became, eventually we became fully affiliated with the Twins. In 92, we were about half Twins and about half ball players that other teams owned, but they didn't have anywhere to put them. So they put them on our Miracle team. The term they used back then was a co-op team. And you can imagine we were dreadful. We had 45 wins and 86 losses, and that was a rainy year, so about 9 games didn't get played at all because of foul weather. So
now,
our second year, we could do every game on the schedule. Over in Miami, we'd only been able to do 50 games, and we learned a ton trying to do a full 140-game slate. We learned a lot about what it takes for the players, what it takes for everybody to survive from April until Labor Day when the 140 are over with, and that taught us plenty.
Now, a minor league broadcast, you're basically part of the team. I mean, I'm sure you had duties that, public relations duties, in addition to just the play-by-play. You went with the team on the road. You traveled on buses. Now, this is a high A league we're talking about in Florida with some excellent talent. You make it out of the high A league, you're going to double A, and next step is the majors. Who did you meet up with? Who did you broadcast that made it to the majors? And tell me about your experience knowing that person in the minors and what they were like.
Well, now, the most famous name was Mariano Rivera. He was on the Fort Lauderdale Yankees in 1992, and we went over there, and Mariano wasn't really a prospect at that stage of the game. You know, he was a starting pitcher, for one thing, and as a starter against us, he struck out 12 Miracle in a game that took all of 1 hour and 38 minutes. It was the quickest game we did in those first couple of years. And he beat us, obviously, 1-0. And that was an incredible game. The next time I heard his name was in 1995 when he joined the Yankees, because we never saw him in Double-A and we never made Triple-A. So, you know, from Fort Lauderdale, he had surgery, and then he reemerged as a closer and became the ultimate closer and the best closer the game has ever seen.
No question about that.
On our team, though, we certainly never had anybody like that. We had one borderline major leaguer was Mike Lansing. He played for the Rockies early in their existence in the mid-90s.
I do remember that name.
That's our one. We had in 92. We had a couple of pitchers, Nate Minchie, Jonathan Hurst, and Mike Mizuraka. Actually, 3 pitchers, and they all made the majors, if only briefly.
Hey, if only briefly, a cup of coffee gets your name in that record book, and that's what it's all about sometimes. What do you like about the game in terms of how it's changed over the years, and what don't you like about the way the game's changed?
Well, I don't like the way that the players in the mid-'90s after the strike turned to steroids to increase their power and up the home runs in the game. I don't like that one bit because they're messing with an incredible amount of God-given talent that's already so far above what normal people have. They shouldn't have to amplify that with steroids. The steroids and the HGH should be left for the sick people who don't have, the talent, don't even have their health. They need those medicines to need steroids for your lungs. HGH can help normal people heal from injuries. These players were using it to amplify their God-given talent, which was already, more than their share. It's like a case of the rich getting richer by illegal means. And that's the biggest thing I dislike. Although, there's others. I don't like all the noise at the ballpark these days. When Toronto hits a home run at Rogers Center, you get this stupid horn that goes off. And that's okay for hockey because almost nobody scores in hockey. But in baseball, particularly in such a small park as the Rogers Center, there's going to be a lot of scoring, and that horn is going to be overused, and it's going to leave everybody deaf.
Now, you say you never made it past AA, but that's obviously in your third year you went to AA?
Right. We were 4 years in AA from 1993 to 1996. And Jim had done some research. We were with New Britain, Connecticut. Jim had done some research, and he had found that in 1992, New Britain was the one AA team that did not have radio. And in the fall of 92, he went up there to Connecticut, and he talked to the general manager there, and he said to the man, he said, I can bring you radio, which you don't have, and we can sell the product. We can be independent contractors as opposed to being employed by the team, and we can live off of the money we make selling the product.
Right.
The general manager, bless his heart, the general manager said, well, that means I'm not taking a risk, so you go find a radio station that's willing to broadcast our garbage product, and you go find people who are going to sponsor you and have commercials on our ball games. That team had lost almost 90 games the last 2 or 3 years running. Of the New Britain Red Sox, they were. And the general manager said, if you and your blind friend can do that, you're more than welcome to be our broadcasters. So
nice.
Jim called me up and
he
said,
lasted 4 years, you say, or 2 years?
Right, he said 4 years, and he called me up and he said, Don, we've been promoted. We're going to AA. And I couldn't have been happier. And then I said, where? And he said, New Britain, Connecticut. And I said, well, wait a minute. We're in Fort Myers, Florida. Is New Britain, Connecticut really a promotion from Florida? But, of course, it was.
It was, of course. Credit to Mike Veck. What vision. And I wonder if you got to know him a little bit, if you got to talk about his illustrious dad, who was, you can't talk about him in a paragraph. Bill Veck was an incredible innovator. He and a great human being. He was the second person to bring a black into an African American into baseball after Branch Rickey, first one in the American League, and he did a myriad of things. Talk about promotions. He was the one that sent Eddie Goodell, who was in those days known as a midget. I mean, now it's politically correct, a little person. I think if I were a small person, I would be offended by little person. He was a small person, and he got up to bat in the major leagues. And So Bill Veeck was a promoter. I'm sure he passed a lot of that on to Mike. Anything that you want to tell me about your relationship with him? Did he bring his dad up a lot? And what was it like getting to know someone like that?
Oh, Mike was a very funny man. He could tell a story, and he could set you laughing. And he had one in particular where he said when he and his brothers were boys, Bill would go outside and he'd get his suntan. And the thing is, Bill had an artificial leg, and the joke was that whoever had the worst report card had to spray paint the leg to match his suntan. You know, how much of that is true, I don't know.
Very good. He
and Mike
did, and what I remember about Bill Veeck in that wooden artificial leg, it was replete with a little ashtray. I don't know if you ever heard that story, but he had a little ashtray built into the wooden leg, and if he was smoking, he'd just put his ashes in the leg and close up the ashtray.
Yes, I did hear that. And Mike was at a young age, Mike was the architect of a Veeck promotion that, in the eyes of the baseball world, the promotion went horribly awry. But
was that free beer night or free record night?
No, it was disco demolition night.
Disco, right? Okay.
What they would do, what the plan was, that they had everybody bring in a disco record, a 45, and they would pay 99 cents to get in. This is at the old Comiskey in Chicago. And the plan was that they'd have like half a stick of dynamite and all these disco records, and they'd blow them to Kingdom Come. Well, what they didn't plan on was, after the explosion, a whole bunch of fans poured out onto the field, and this was in between games of a twilight doubleheader back when those were scheduled. And the fans, they couldn't get the fans off the field. You know, they were jubilant fans. They weren't riotous. They weren't heckling anybody. They were so happy about the disco demolition and the explosion of all those disco records. But they still couldn't clear them off the field, as happy as they were. You know, they were not willing to leave the field, and the other team and the umpires declared it a forfeit. And as I say, in the eyes of the major league, you know, head honchos of the time, it was a horrible disaster where Bill Veeck's wife, Mary Frances, said to him when the smoke cleared, she said to him, "Bill, I think you finally got the midget off your back." By which she meant there was something else Bill would be remembered for. Because Bill took the heat, even though it was Mike's idea. His father, took the fall for him.
Well, you know how I remember him. He built the 1948 Cleveland Indians, and that wasn't too bad. He was courageous enough to bring Satchel Paige into the league. I think he brought Satchel Paige in twice. I think he had the St. Louis Browns as well. And
yes.
I know he had the Browns, but I think he had Satchel at
right.
the Browns.
Yep.
So all this that transpired with you and Mike, it almost seems like the natural flow of things for the name Veeck. And which happened to be the name of the book. One of the first books I ever read in baseball was written by a fellow by the name of Ed Lynn, and it was called Veeck as in Wreck. And it taught me and a whole bunch of other people about the inner workings of the sport, about how deals are made, how things are put together, and it was a terrific read. And, Bill Veeck is one of the all-time heroes, and Mike still does what he does, from what I understand. He still does minor league ball. He owns a few teams. Am I correct about that?
Yes, in fact, there's a second chapter to our Veeck story. We were 4 years in Double-A, And Mike still remembered who we were, and we were, how could we forget who he was?
Right.
And he had opened the St. Paul Saints in 1993, and he would call up my partner Jim, and he'd say, "When are you coming to St. Paul?" And Jim would be like, "What?" And he's like, "When are you going to come to St. Paul and help me with the St. Paul Saints?" And Jim was like, "Well, we're not, Mike. We're not doing it. We're not going to St. Paul." Well, that was 93, 94, 95. In 96, the Saints had Darryl Strawberry, and they made a lot of national headlines that way with Darryl Strawberry, coming off his drug troubles and issues that he had. So, following the 1996 season, things weren't looking good in New Britain. So Jim said to me, what about St. Paul? And I'm like, "Jim, you got to be crazy. St. Paul, 20 below, 50-mile-an-hour winds, I'm going to freeze to death." And he's like, "What about St. Paul and Mike Veck?" And I'm like, "Well, now that could be a whole different story, because we had 4 years of non-Veck, and Veck has a slogan. He's had it for many years. Fun is good. And that means ballpark fun. That means fun upstairs in the booth, and away from Veck, they're not bad human beings, but there's just not as much fun going on, not as much, kidding and laughing on the broadcast, not as many guests up in the booth. In New Britain, we learned a lot more about ourselves in 4 years of AA. We polished our product. We learned by talking to other AA broadcasters, but Jim said, let's do this. Let's join Veck again. Let's help him in St. Paul. He had Strawberry last year. Now this year he'll have us, and we'll, get photographed, and we'll be on TV all over the upper Midwest, in the cities where the Northern League operated at that time.
Right.
And I said, well, let me do this. Let me propose to my girlfriend. Let me see let me get a yes or no from her, and then I'll tell you what we're doing. And I proposed, and she said yes. She said she'd follow me to St. Paul. And I said, "Jim, let's back up and go to St. Paul." So we went, we rejoined Mike Veck in 1997. And the last 6 years of our career, from 97 to 02, we belonged lock, stock, and barrel to Mike Veck.
Nice. How did the end come? What made you stop doing it?
Well, the girl I proposed to, that I married on this day, as a matter of fact, September 27th, 1997, was the day of our marriage.
Well,
and
nice
I knew,
to remember that.
I would never forget. I knew there were health issues going right from the beginning. I wasn't fooled by that. But they worsened enough that I would get very worried if I was out on the road and I'd call up on the phone and I wouldn't be able to reach her. I'd become very anxious. And the longer I couldn't reach her, the more I would wonder if she had had a seizure and I was 800 miles away, let's say, and I was unable to help her. That never happened, but just the anxiety of it was enough.
Right.
And at the end of 2002, I said, "Jimmy, I have to do this. I have to take a more sedentary life so I can do a better job watching over Melanie with her health." And as fate would have it, her health markedly improved over the next few years. She stopped having the seizures she was having. They got some new medication at the beginning of 2003, and she got on that, and her health got better. And my health began to go south. I became a diabetic, and I have always been a severe asthmatic, and so a comeback was never really possible. Her health was good, but mine had gone south to the point where I could no longer handle the rigors of the baseball world. I had worked several jobs. I worked 5.5 years with Alamo National Rent-A-Car as a customer service person, and you have no idea what a radio voice will do if you're in the customer service business. You know, I won over customers just because I had a good voice that they wanted to listen to.
An interesting voice. You
Yes,
definitely
exactly.
have that.
And it
Did they tell you about your regional accent? Because I detect, I'm a New Yorker, I detect that you are from the tri-state area. And do they encourage that, or do they want you to be cookie cutter?
Mike Leck was enough of a gentleman to never talk about it. He said, you be who you are, just don't imitate somebody. Make your own style, whatever that style may be. And after we left him, our bosses in New Britain never cared enough about the broadcast to say yes, no, or maybe. And then we went back with Vec, and he says, you guys have improved over the years. You're becoming yourself and not imitating someone. Because I can tell you, in my college days, I imitated Howard Cosell. And my professor got on my back about it, which is how I noticed that that's what I was doing. He said, you better listen to your broadcast. You sound much too much like Howard Cosell to make it as a professional. So I did. I listened, and I worked hard, and I tell you, my mom went to her glory saying that I still sounded like Howard Cosell, much as I tried to beat it.
Right. Well, she was proud of it, I'm sure.
She was proud of what I did, that I followed the dream and made it as far as I did. She was at the game where Jimmy and I did some major league half innings. The Marlins were wonderful people to invite us down in 1994. And we did the bottom of the third and the top of the fifth and the bottom of the seventh of a Marlins-Cubs game that I will never forget if I live to be twice what I am now. And that was our one cup of coffee in the major leagues. I got to meet Tony Perez. I was interviewed countless times during that stretch. It was just fantastic. And that is, in fact, the opening chapter of my upcoming book that I'm writing.
Tell me about that. Tell me the name of the book, the working title, if you will.
Yes, the working title is Baseball as I Saw It, and Baseball as I Saw It, and then I'm going to add something like the Life and Times of the First Blind Broadcaster, something like that will be the second line of the title. And the reason it's Baseball as I Saw It is because I have a daily column now on a blog called Baseball as I See It. I write that daily as often, as my health dictates. When I'm not well, I don't write one, or when I have a commitment of some kind, I don't write one. But I really try to write.
How has your diabetes affected you? And tell me how you cope with that, because you're obviously courageous, and there are people out there that more people that are aspiring broadcasters who are blind, fewer of them than there are people going through diabetes. Tell me what you do on a daily basis to keep your health as steady and as good as it can possibly be.
Well, what all diabetics must do is monitor their sugar twice a day. And I got hold of a talking meter that does that. You test you test your blood, and the meter says what my number is. And mercifully, here in New Jersey, where I live now, my numbers are much better than they ever were when I was living in South Carolina, where I lived from the year 2000 to 2015. All the years I was in South Carolina, once I became diabetic, my numbers were way out of hand. And getting back here, the numbers have been much better here in New Jersey.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, I came here injured. I came here in a wheelchair, and I was moved in with my sister and her husband. And my sister taught me two words I wasn't very familiar with in South Carolina, the words portion control. So in South Carolina, like I would pour my breakfast cereal freehand. I wouldn't pour into a cup measure. You know, and Betty Jane, my sister, has me pour it into a cup measure and then pour it into the cereal bowl. And there's 1 cup of cereal, and that's about half or maybe even 1/3 of what I was eating in South Carolina.
Just filling up the whole bowl.
Yeah, you got it. That's what I was doing.
Yeah.
I poured freehand. That's what I mean. I didn't use any kind of measure. I didn't care. I mean, portion, like I said, portion control were 2 words I didn't know down there.
Right.
I would eat, 4 and 5 slices of pizza, even though I was a diabetic, and even though I knew that was going to play havoc with my numbers, and yet I would do it anyway. That's just how I was down there. That wasn't a very good lifestyle, and the numbers were bad to prove it. And now, I have 2, or at the very, very outside, 3 slices if they're small, and the numbers are better. The numbers are way better than they were in the South Carolina days.
Good. Don, tell me how you write. Do you write when things occur to you, or do you make an appointment with yourself to sit down and write at, say, 9 to 12, or how do you do that?
Now, my column, Baseball as I See It, my blog, I write that 9 to noon. That's on a schedule. The book is not scheduled because I'm also looking for a job, and so I spend most of the afternoon looking for a job, and if there aren't any applications to fill out, then I work on the book. And then I had a stretch there where I couldn't work on the book for a while, where I was almost too scared to work on the book because some things were going to be dug up that were not necessarily things I'd feel comfortable remembering, but I have to if I'm going to write an honest account of what happened.
What would some of those things be? On-field or off-field adventures?
Oh, definitely off-field. I
Okay.
met a girl in 1991, and this is not the girl I married. This should have been, but it wasn't. And she was fabulous. She was from Miami. She was the nicest and kindest. You never heard her say a bad word about anybody. And, there were, other things about her that I don't talk about in a family atmosphere. But she was something. And we were together from 91 to 95. And if I'm going to write the book, honestly, I have to write about the good and the bad with her, how we ultimately broke up. She married somebody else, and I found Melanie, who I was married to until March of 2015 when she left. We were married 17 years. So those adventures and misadventures are going to have to be in the book if I'm writing an honest book.
Right. Well,
and that's the only book I can write is an honest one. I want blind people to read about how I got to be a broadcaster, and it's basically going to end with me leaving the broadcast business. There'll be an epilogue, a short one, about the events since then, but what the real meat of the book is going to be my early life, my adventures and misadventures growing up, becoming a broadcaster and doing it professionally for 12 years and then wrapping it up the way I did. That's going to be the meat of the book.
And the way you stay in touch with baseball now is through that blog that you write, and that you have an appointment with yourself to write from 9 to 12. I wasn't far off with that.
And also I listen to games constantly on the radio. I listen to the Mets, and of course with the Internet I can listen to any team. I listened to Vin Scully's final game on Sunday and the tribute they did on Friday night last, because Scully was as good as it could ever be. As good as Bob Murphy was, Vin Scully was the thinking man's broadcaster, the intellectual, where Bob Murphy taught me the game at long distance. He was the instructor. Vin Scully was the thinking man's broadcaster.
Well, Vince Scully is ending his career up in San Francisco. He doesn't travel, hasn't been on the road with the Dodgers, but for the last weekend, he's coming up to San Francisco, and he's going to do the Giants, where it comes full circle for the gentleman. He was a Giant fan growing up. He was a Mel Ott worshiper. He went to Fordham University in the Bronx. And it's just marvelous how the baseball community has come together to love him and to shower him with accolades. It's well-deserved, and a little bit of all of us is a big loss losing him. For all of us, it won't be the same.
Because from his era, there's really nobody left. He's the last of the breed. Now, with him gone, the best in the business is a local from your area, John Miller from Santa Rosa.
Terrific.
He's the best there is now, with Scully getting out of it.
No, John Miller's from Hayward, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
But that's close enough, Northern California, and he is terrific. But
he did me a favor. He did me a favor once, and I'm never going to forget it as long as I live. John Miller, out in New Britain, Connecticut, our team was 0-12 our first year. And this was the year we invented the scheme pay-per-win. You know how pay-per-view operates. You only pay for events that you see. Well, pay-per-win meant the sponsors only paid for games that we won. But we opened the year 0-12, and our last game number 12 in that stretch, we had people giving us boxes of macaroni and cheese so we wouldn't starve to death. So we're thinking, what desperate move can we make to break this up and end this losing streak? And I'm thinking there's only one way. There's one hope, and that's John Miller. If he will grant me an interview and talk to me about his Orioles team of 88 that lost 21 straight games to open up the season, if he'll do that, that'll break our mojo. So I called the Orioles, and by the best of luck and the kindness of John Miller, I got him on the air for 4 or 5 minutes. We mostly talked about that 1988 Orioles team and how he survived an 0-21 start and how the Orioles survived it and got through. And he said they were relieved when the streak ended. They were not celebrating. They were relieved like the passengers on the Titanic. So we played that on the air.
Ripken's dad was the manager, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and we played that interview on the air on Game 13. We were in Binghamton, and doggone if we didn't beat the Binghamton Mets that night to end our 0-12. And I've never, ever, ever forgotten John Miller for that, and I never will.
Wow. Some announcers just would have gone out and gotten a slump buster, a baseball Annie. But you got John Miller. I don't know.
Another fellow, and God love him too, is Harry Callis. This is a debt I'll never be able to repay, just like the one to John Miller. Harry Callis I met when we were still, Jim and I were still baseball nobodies. We hadn't even made pro yet. And we met Harry in the booth in Philadelphia. And when we would do our games, since we didn't have a real station, we were just into a tape recorder, we made up the name the Basement Network because the games, Jim said, would end up in somebody's basement. And, in fact, they are in my sister's basement right now. But we said, so it's the Basement Network, and that's what we called ourselves. And we said to Harry, Harry, would you do us a favor of a lifetime? Would you do a 5-second thing and say, hi, I'm Harry Callis, and when I'm not busy, I light up my big cigar and listen to the Basement Network. And Harry did it. And we put that at the beginning of our broadcasts from then until we turned pro, and that pretty much closed down the Basement Network, because when we were pros, we wanted to save all our talent for our professional games. Now, Harry, 6 years later, played a role with us in 1996. We had the idea to do a recreation broadcast, because 1996 was the 75th anniversary of baseball on the radio, and we knew that recreations had been a big deal in the 30s and 40s when the announcers didn't travel. They did recreations. And I knew
Ronald Reagan was one of those who did recreations for a station in Chicago.
Dutch Reagan, as they called him, yes. And I knew Harry had done them, and he'd done recreations because he was with the Hawaii Islanders, and they didn't want to send a broadcaster over to the mainland. So I knew this, and I'm thinking for our broadcast, let's have an interview with Harry if he'll do it. And, of course, he did. He did just about anything people could ask of him. He was such a kindly man. And he did this interview, and we put it on the air before our recreation, and it was so well received. We did recreation night every August 5th from 96 until 02, because August 5th was the day of the first baseball broadcast.
Wow, very cool. You know, when my Giants, the New York Giants, I was 11 and they left New York, there's a fellow by the name of Les Kiter who would do recreations of San Francisco Giant baseball games for the few of us, really, who gave a damn about the New York Giants. It seems that many, many more people care about the Brooklyn Dodgers memory than the Giants. But there's a number of us, and we love those recreations. And Harry would get a bat and a ball in the studio and just smack the bat, a piece of stick against the ball, and he'd go, bang, it's off the wall, blah, 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 and Mays turned second, headed for third, and it would all be wired. You know, Mays doubles, that's all he'd get. And he'd have to create the game as he imagined it to be. And
as he received it off the wire service.
Right, exactly. And
Les Kiter was one terrific. Of a kind. He not only did that, he did the Knicks. And the funny thing with the Knicks is the Knicks weren't exactly happy to be on radio. And Kiter would be doing the game, and somehow the operator would keep breaking in on the broadcast to get him off the air. And sometimes the Knicks would only let him do like the second half of a game. Also, he did a lot of boxing. I've got a big boxing collection, and Les Kiter was the voice of some of the Floyd Patterson fights, some of the very early Ali fights, the first Ali Liston fight Les Kiter did. And you
must have Don Dunphy's stuff. Don Dunphy did the Fight of the Week in New York when I was growing up.
Yes, I have a good many done by the Hall of Famer, Don Dunphy. He was a one-of-a-kind also. You know, he and Kiter had very different styles, but they were both well worth listening to.
Nice. Do you remember any of the old Yankee announcers when you were growing up? I don't know if you go back as far as Mel Allen.
No, although I've got him in my baseball collection. I started collecting baseball recordings when I began as a pro in 1991, and I got Mel Allen and Red Barber in the collection, and about every good announcer, you know, that made a name and won the Ford C. Frick Award. But I remember growing up as a kid with the little radio under my pillow, and it would be the Mets of Nelson and Kiner and Murphy, or it would be the Yankees if they were playing and the Mets weren't. And the Yankees had, of course, the Scooter, the one-of-a-kind Phil Rizzuto, and they
Don
had Bill
Messer
White.
was another
Frank
one.
Messer, what a great announcer he was.
Yeah.
Jim got to talk to Bill White, which I didn't do. Jim called him on the phone and talked to him when he was league president. I never talked to any of the Yankee broadcasters, but I certainly listened to them, especially those West Coast.
Hey, you think talking to Bill White is something? I get to talk to Don Wardlow. So I'm just as blessed as your your former partner. Believe me, you're an inspiration to me, let me tell you. And I hope this is the first of many times that you come and visit us here.
Well, Ralph, I'd be pleased to do that. I hope your followers enjoy this recording that we've done, this interview, and I hope they'll...
It doesn't matter. I enjoyed it.
I hope they'll read my blog and read my upcoming book.
By the way, they will enjoy it. They will read your blog. Again, the name of the blog is Baseball as I See It. And is that just .com?
It is. And what we had to do is we had to put a dash in between each word. So it's baseball-as-I-see-it, c-it.com.
.com.
But you just
for
remember the dashes.
Out there listening
and
to that.
Bookmark it or favorite it or whatever.
When is the book due?
Luckily, since I don't have a publisher, I don't have a deadline. But I'm going to try and get it in the next couple of years. I'm going to try to focus on it this coming winter and add a whole lot more to it. So maybe it could be out next spring, or it might be in 2018. It's a lot more of a project than I thought when I first had the idea, which goes back to August of 2015. I had the idea to do it.
Well, I wish you all the best of luck, and your project is tremendous. Who would not want to read about your experiences, and who out there is not inspired by your very being? So do come back, and I'm going to end this segment and do it in the way that I do most of my recordings. I'm going to implore you, Don, to keep your dreams wet and your humor dry. Keep your children and grandchildren out of recruiting stations, military recruiting stations, and off the laps of clerics that wear dresses. And if you just did that and nothing else, your life might be a little better. No guarantees, but not just you, everybody out there. Thank you, sir. I'm glad you're my friend.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Be well.